Good evening, everybody, and welcome. We are going to be talking about seed saving this evening. My name is Keto. If you don't know me, I work for Keep Growing Detroit, and I coordinate our education programming, amongst other things. I'm super happy to have our one of our farmers from our farm manager from Keep Growing Detroit's farm to be talking with us today about seed saving. And he's going to be sharing a lot of his kind of practical experience. Hopefully you'll be able to walk away from today with the confidence to save seeds on your own. He just stepped away for 1 second to grab a glass of water. So we'll just get started as soon as he comes back here. In the meantime, while we're waiting, if you have anything in particular that you have questions about related to seed saving, if there's a specific crop you want to know about, or if you tried it and it didn't work, maybe drop a question or comment in the chat and we'll make sure we address that as we're going along.
All right, kiddo, I'm still here.
Okay, Akello is back. So welcome, Akello, and go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Again, my name is Akello, Farm Manager at KGD. Before we hop into the lesson, I also want to ask if anybody in the class has any experience with seed saving, what your favorite seeds are to save, and those with not that much experience, what are some seeds that you're interested in trying out, some varieties that you like to try? For a PowerPoint where, well, Kita's gonna help keep me focused so we don't go on too many tangents, but we're gonna be working off this PowerPoint talking about seed saving and really the basics that you'll need to know to get started with that. And yeah, let's walk through it. And if you have any questions, just post those in the chat. And Keto, I'll be pausing every now and then to let things sink in and also for time for questions. Oh, got the slow transition. So we've adapted a PowerPoint from Grant Olson from Seed Savers Exchange, which is going to be a resource for us that we'll bring up. But this is going to be a vegetable seed saving 101. So what is seed saving? Seed saving is the process of saving seeds from open pollinated vegetables and grains. Now, what's key to understand here is what's an open pollinated seeds. This, for us beginners for seed savings, is going to be our low-hanging fruit for us to get our toes wet into seed saving. Open pollinated seeds are seeds that can be saved or grown next to their plants in the same variety with them. And with that, through their pollination, they'll be breeding true to seeds, meaning that you'll get that same plant from those two plants or X amount of plants that you have in that area, as long as there's no cross-breeding that happens, which we'll talk about addressing. But because these ones are, all they have to be is open pollinated with seeds amongst their same variety, you'll continuously, or you should be getting the same seed from those to come back in that year or next year, or from that seed, pardon me. And we'll also be talking about hybrid seeds, or GMO seeds, or genetically engineered seeds as well, and all of that. But one question I want to pose to our group is, why do you all think that seed saving is important, and what does it mean to you all? For us here at Keep Growing Detroit, seed saving is a crucial part to our mission of helping the city become a food sovereign place. A lot of the transplanted seeds that you all receive from us, the majority of those seeds that you all get are open pollinated seeds that you all can receive, that you all can do seed saving from yourselves, but also, we just don't want to be continuously supplying, vegetables and seeds. We want people to eventually build those skills and also learn how to do seed saving, for themselves so that they can take it where they like it to go.
So was that an open question, Akello? Do you want to get responses from folks?
Yes, and we'll have to see as the responses come in. So I'll probably pause and as they flow.
So there's a few responses from the first question about
let's take a
if you've done any seed saving. So Charlotte's saying, I failed last year. I'm trying again this year. My peppers and tomatoes, not sure about flowers like zinnias. And then Kirk said, I saved some seeds from sunflowers this summer. That's about it. So he's just kind of new to it. Elena, I think, is just kind of coming in saying, I have not done much seed saving, but I'm hoping to learn more about it. I'm a garden educator and want to be able to teach this to kiddos so we can seed seeds in our school gardens. Awesome.
Beautiful.
And then Clarice was saying, in response to why is your seed saving important, Clarice is saying seed saving is cost effective.
Very true. Very true. I do the ordering for our seeds for the garden resource program, and I will second that. All right, thank you all for that, and we'll definitely talk about the tomatoes and peppers and try to share some information about the zinnias along with Charlotte. The slides will definitely be getting sent out. Thank you all. All right. Let's see if these slides are on time. So
before we move on, do you want to elaborate any more on, any other ideas, or do we want to dig in any more on, aside from economy, about the import? Yeah, yes.
Yeah, we'll dig deep once we get to the GMO part.
Okay. And then Peggy just put out a question. What about things like beets and carrots, which we will definitely ask.
Yes, beets and carrots. I love leaf root crops. Yes, we'll definitely talk about biennials and how to do seed saving from those. All right, so a basic overview of how plants make seeds. Seed production requires both male and plant seeds, or plants that also have the male and female flower part. Now, those are either pollinated through birds, bees, insects, or by wind. And when that pollen connects with the female plant, then that pollen and that flower produces the seeds that we ultimately get for our seed saving. So in an abbreviated version of that. But what we really need to make note of, and when we do purchase seeds, or either it's seeds from KGD or seeds that we just purchase from whichever seed company, we always want to make note of what type of seed it is, because there are different types of seeds out there. The ones that we'll be using for seed saving, we should always make sure that they're either open pollinated seeds or heirloom seeds. Now, these are the seeds that are easily maintained, meaning that if you do seed saving from them with the correct practices, you will get the same vegetable seed to come out next time.
So can you give an example of that, just to drive home that point?
Yes. So for example, you have some bean plants that you planted in a field that's right next to each other a open pollinated variety of beans, Kentucky Wonder, for example. Now, what you have to do with that bean is pretty much make sure that you've planted a good amount. I'll say about, and beans are pretty small, so about 20 or so bean plants in an area next to each other. And all those beans have to do is pretty much grow next to each other, dry out, and then you do seed saving from that. And what's happening there is that those beans are, pollinating each other because they're next to each other. And you're basically just collecting the seeds after those are harvested. So beans, for example, are a plant that we're saving here on the farm. And literally, those are the same things that I did. I had about 4 beds of beans that are about 20 feet each. And those contain numerous plants within them. And we're going to be doing some seed saving from those for our end of the year food distribution, to do some seed saving go along with our Thanksgiving distribution. So a real simple plant that all I had to do is just plant those next to each other and let those go. Being season for harvest. I will also talk about how your crop field planting is going to change to incorporate, or what you'll have to do to incorporate some more time for seed saving. But beans, they're pretty much done for harvest after pretty much today.
Right.
Their harvest yields definitely go down during this time once the seasons kind of change. And so pretty much all the beans that are left on there, I'm going to leave those on the vine to let those dry out on that plant. And then come November, they'll be dried down and I'll be able to get the seeds from those.
Right. So you wouldn't be harvesting them like when you're in their edible form. You got to leave them on. Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And that's really the important thing to note about seed saving. You're not harvesting like you typically would a plant for the fruit. You're harvesting that plant for its seed. So that means that you're going to be giving that plant a lot more time than you normally would. And we'll go into depth about that in a bit. But one thing to also note about open pollinated seeds, you can get some variance and some differences that happen if you have cross pollination between plants of the same variety and of a different variety, of the same species. So, for example, if you have sun goat tomatoes, and this is just a name for example, and you got some big beef tomatoes, planted next to each other, there's a high chance that those plants will cross with each other. All right, so in your crop planting, you would want to give some distance between two different varieties. All right, just showing some variants of tomatoes. So we mentioned open pollinated seeds. Those are the ones that we're focused on for our introduction into seed saving, because those ones are going to be a lot easier for us to seed save from. Now, you might also hear and also see that, there are hybrid seeds that are, also for sale and available. You might not see hybrid seed written on your seed packet or so on, but you will see the sign that says F1. And that F1 basically refers to hybrid, but that 1 on that seed packet means, or that F1 basically means generation 1, meaning that this seed comes from 2 different plants, and together those 2 different plants, you call those, I guess, generation 0, come together and they produce that generation 1 crop. Now,
to clarify, 2 different varieties of the same type of plant.
Right. So this is a cross. So hybrid plants are cross between open pollinated seeds. They could be other different types of seeds as well, but they're a cross between open pollinated seeds, two different varieties of plants. And then those two genes mixed up those plants and bred are hybrid seeds that we have today. And so seed companies and so on. So they're really in the business of breeding new varieties that taste good and have disease resistances and so on, and might yield better and such. But for seed saving purposes, we call this a generation one seed because it's basically a new variety. Now, to put some connection to that, okay, we got our generation one seeds. What are our open pollinated seeds? What are our heirloom seeds? Those would be considered generation 6 or 8, meaning that those have been crossed over the years for X amount of years together, breeding that same plant. And so that just refers to how long that plant has been around. And so it's harder to save seeds from hybrid seeds because they're new, meaning that their genetics aren't so strong. In that if you do some seed saving, take that seed from a hybrid tomato, for example, and plant that, that fruit set that you get might not look like that original plant. The genetics might be a little bit all over the place, or the fruit, you might still get a tomato plant, but it won't look like that exact tomato fruit that you got. And for the purpose of seed saving, that's not really what we're shooting for. But if you're looking at it from a plant breeder perspective, where you're looking to cross different types of varieties and such, that's still something that you can use for helping yourself create a new variety and such. But for the purpose of seed saving, we want to stick with open pollinated seeds, things that we know if we grow them together, we'll get the same plant from that.
Right. So just to elaborate a little bit more on the open pollinated and heirloom are genetically stable, meaning that you can reliably save seed from them now, and they'll produce the same fruit year after year. Whereas hybrid seeds have their gene pool is so diverse because it's a cross of two gene pools that the progeny, the babies of those plants are varied. You don't necessarily know that what you're going to get from that result after the first generation.
It's exactly that. I just thought about using humans, for example. It's like a way to break down, or
I've talked about dogs before. Like if you do like a Labrador and a poodle, people do like Labradoodles, right? So that's a hybrid, right?
Like a mule and a horse together, or a pony and a horse, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. So it's exactly the same way. And I guess while we're also on that point, about different, and this kind of goes into the breeding in a little bit, but also for your farm planting as well, that you should know if you're planning to farm for seed saving. Okay, we have Solanaceae, plants in the tomato family. We got tomatoes, we got peppers, and we got eggplants. Those are in the same family. Now, a question that you might ask yourself is, okay, I'm trying to do some seed saving from these different plants, but they're in the same family. Should I be concerned that these plants are going to cross with each other? Those plants, although they're in the same family, they're in different species. So they will not cross with each other, meaning that, your pepper plant and your tomato plant, they can't, procreate. And so as far as a seed saving concern goes with that, that isn't something that you should worry about for your farm planning. Now, you will still need some, distance in between your tomatoes and tomatoes that are within the same species, but those plants, as far as being concerned about those in the same family, not a huge concern that you should have. But getting back to hybrids, another thing that you might have heard or talked about or heard about or have exceptions about is hybrids and genetically modified organisms. Hybrids refer to pretty much the old style of putting two plants together and trying to find something that is edible and good and a little bit different. It has some characteristics to it. Genetically modified organisms or genetically engineered organisms is a totally different practice of going inside the gene pool, looking at it and adding, intentionally adding and specifically adding certain properties from other different types of crops or organisms and adding that to that plant. Now, let's see where this goes. So basically a lab created and spliced and all of that. Now, I made one change to this PowerPoint here where GMOs are a cause for concern because those seeds are owned by a company. Now, some quick facts about GMO seeds. Now, not getting into whether, sorry, I think you all can see this. Just gonna pull up some quick things. Now, not getting into whether GMO seeds are good or not for people. My concern for GMO seeds is the people no longer have control of the seed. So this kind of gets into why seed saving is very important. Those GMO seeds that are being produced by companies, they own the patents to that. And this is very similar to hybrid seeds where companies own the patents to that hybrid plant, that proprietary. They know the two plants to mix together or number of plants to mix together to get that crop. And then GMO seeds, they, own the rights to how that crop is reproduced, how it's sold, and all of that, and so on. And as far as our food systems are concerned, GMO seeds, as far as corn, your soybeans, your canola seeds, those are some of the simple crops where GMOs are currently allowed. They're already in use. About 95% of the corn that's being grown is genetically modified. And if we understand or if we have some knowledge about things, how Monsanto is controlling that seed and how that's affecting farmers and the prices around that, we don't want the same things to happen to the everyday foods that we're currently eating. And so us doing seed saving, for the sake of food sovereignty is a way that we, fight against that. And if we also want to, break it down even further, we all experienced the pandemic and the food shortages and also with the supply chain issues that showed up with how there were limitations on certain things and so on. That really showed us just how many issues our food system has and also our supply chain issues that currently exist. And also really how our food system isn't really intentional. It's more so of all right, we're going to grow X amount of food and, whoever wants to buy it and whoever has access to it, will get it as long as they can pay, which really leaves out a lot of people. And with the process of seed saving, we can start to answer those food insecurity questions ourselves, which is really what we're trying to head towards, but also, have fun seed saving and do experiments with breeding of our own or breeding seeds of our own. And also, having food that we know that we can guarantee and depend on without having to pay exorbitant prices for GMO seeds and also hybrid seeds, because those are the most expensive seeds to buy, especially if you're looking at tomatoes and peppers and so on. But yeah,
Can I
anything
add
to
one
add to that,
more?
Keto? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I would just say that, I mean, the other kind of just risk or just unknown of
Yeah.
GMOs, and I just want to emphasize that most GMOs these days are in commodities. Akello mentioned corn
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh,
and beans and soy. So a lot of our general vegetable varieties, it's relatively uncommon to have as GMOs. But that being said, when they're in the lab, doing the
mm-hmm.
applications to these seeds, it is essentially, you know, chartering paths that we just don't know are what like the ultimate implications of messing with genetics like that are going to have on, like, so say there, in theory, there's those GMO sugar beets, and they're out, and the farmer across the way is just trying to grow some regular organic beets, and he has an issue with crossing, and there gets, like, so there's just unknowns about how that is going to affect the progeny, the next generations of those crops. So there's just a lot of risk. So that's another one of the downsides of GMOs. But just to emphasize again, what Akello was saying is, like, hybrids is like old school crossing. It's just like breeding dogs. It's like just like crossing one variety with another. It's been done for ages and ages. It's not anywhere near in terms of, like, there's not any, aside from the ownership problem, which is clearly an issue that Akello was pointing out. But functionally for risk of our natural environment, hybrids are not a problem.
Yeah. And I'll add one more note about GMO seeds. Also, a majority of the food that's eaten by animals or the animals that we eat, they are fed by GMO grown crops. And GMO seeds for at least consumers, consumers can't go out and buy GMO seeds. Those are only available to farmers. Currently, I think as I was doing research for this class, I saw that I think about next year, the FDA approved this GMO tomato to be sold to consumers in America. So, it is the technology, and it's on our way to our shelves and so on, and it's technically already in our shelves, but just something for us to look out for. And yeah, so just getting into another reason to do seed saving and also some seed breeding on your own is to help out with the genetic diversity. So we had way more different types of vegetables back in the day, and now there's way fewer selections. And so by getting more people involved in doing seed saving and doing seed breeding, it's just projects and just for food sovereignty, we can help address food diversity. And here's just a look at the seed industry structure. I believe about 30% of all seeds are controlled by these companies. And so seed monopolies are, along with any monopoly, very dangerous for just being a independent grower or so on. So there's a lot of can of worms to unwrap, but we can say our say and have our say by continuing on to do seed saving for ourselves and sharing those seeds with people we love. So a couple of things to know while we're doing some seed savings. Here's just a brief list as we hop into it. So we want to know our variety. So I mentioned how we have different species. We have well, starting from the top, we have a family, we have the species, and then we have the variety. Your variety is basically the nickname of your plant. The species, you could call that the first name of a plant, and then the family would be the last name of a plant. So just a way to kind of categorize that in your mind. We also want to know the
So
life cycle.
Could you give an example of that?
Yes. So, for example, we have, and I will be butchering these Latin names. So we have the Solanaceae or Solanaceae family, and in
That's the
that you
last name.
have,
Right.
and
Okay.
in that we have the tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and then the next name for that would be Solanaceae, which refers to, I believe, tomato, and then our tomato variety or would be Laceraceae or something of the sort. These are all Latin names, and the kind of going back or backing up a little bit, the taxonomy that we used for this was started in the 1700s by a Swedish botanist. I believe his last name is Linnéan. And so this is the process that we use, the process of categorizing these plants. And the way that he did it was basically by the characteristics of the plant, so its similarities and the similarities that it has to other plants. And so there's a breakdown that I believe is in this PowerPoint.
Okay.
But it basically goes from kingdom, order, so on and so on, till we get to the part that we really need to focus on, which is the family, the genus, and the species of the crop.
Okay. I guess I was interpreting that you were saying something like tomato, Solanaceae, big beef, or eggplant, Solanaceae, black king. So like it's the first name is the crop, the second name is the family, and the third name is like the nickname is like the
Right. So basically
no?
the nickname is the difference. So that's the only thing that changes. All tomatoes basically have the same first
Right.
name.
Right.
So the nickname would be the variety. So the sun goat, the big beef, all of that. And by them being in that same family of the Lyseraceae, or excuse me, the species of the Lyseraceae, meaning that they can all cross-pollinate with each other.
Okay.
It's better to look at once we get to the
okay. All right. Great.
Yeah. And life cycle, this is basically the understanding of when your plant flowers. So whether it's a annual crop, a biennial crop, or a perennial crop. And we're just going to go through this list quickly to get it on the back of your heads, but we'll be going through it through the PowerPoint. Also knowing how your plants pollinate, whether it's by wind pollination, through insects, or self-pollination. And also knowing how to isolate your plants to protect them from cross-pollination. So we talked about, putting your plants only next to each other that you want them to pollinate with, and then having some distance in between those next plants. And then also how many plants to grow to make sure that your genetic pool is strong. So you just don't want to grow just, 2 plants next to each other. You might need maybe 10 plants or 20 plants. And this, of course, is dependent on how big that plant gets. 20 tomatoes looks a lot different than 20 bean plants. And then probably very important point is knowing your environment. So we talked about the gene pool and so on and how we're selecting for genetic traits. What also has a huge impact on how well your crop will look is also the soil that your crop is growing in. So don't ignore building your soils as you're doing seed saving. And then when to harvest your seeds. So we talked about beans briefly and how beans need to dry out and how that happens later in the season. But that looks a little bit different for tomatoes, looks a little bit different for especially your biennial crops as well. And then how to prepare your seeds for storage. So quickly, our bean plants, those all have a husk that needs to be broken down to get to that seed. So what are those things that we need to do to get to those seeds? And even for a tomato plant, it's those seeds are inside of a tomato. What do we need to do to get to that tomato? And then how to store your seeds to make sure that they're available for you for next year or even the year after that. And how to share, which I'm pretty sure we learned how to do in kindergarten. No, but
But I just want to add really quick that there's
Yeah.
a lot of, we're talking a lot of jargon and this is and that's, but I just, it's not, once we get to the bottom, we're going to get down to the brass tacks here a little later, and you can do this. It's not that complicated. We're just learning a little bit of language that we're going through right now. So,
Yeah,
don't let it overwhelm.
it's the Latin that tricks us up, but what's important for that is that it is a very helpful tool as far as seed saving goes. And so what I was mentioning previously about the taxonomy, so starts all the way up here with the kingdom and the order and so on. But what we really need to know for seed saving purposes is the genus and the family. As long as the genus is the same of that plant and that it's also the same species, that means that you can do seed saving with that plant together. Okay. Now, in some cases, we might see the same family, like tomatoes and peppers are in the same family. But if those genuses are different, which they're going to be for tomatoes and peppers, that means that you can't cross-pollinate, or those won't cross-pollinate with each other. And then the species, and then we have our nickname, the variety names that we give and that we love that are also fancy. So very simple, bit straightforward. What you need to know for the species information for seed saving purposes is the genus and the species. And I was mentioning that the family, that would be the last name of that plant. The genus would be the first name of that plant, and then the species would be the nickname. I guess it doesn't include everything, but then there's also that other nickname of that we give that plant individually to help, distinct or let people know that it's different from each other. But we could definitely see it here in this picture here. There's all different types of beans. All these beans here have the same family name. They have the same genus name, but these beans in here will also have the same species name as well. The difference would be that their nickname, the common names that we give them would be different. Okay. So knowing your plant life cycle. All right, so annuals basically refer to plants that have their growing season within a single year, meaning that they're going to germinate, they're going to go into their vegetative state, they're going to go into their fruiting state, and they're going to produce those seeds, and then they're going to die out within that year. For the purpose of seed saving, that means that when we plant this seed, that we know that in this year, we're going to be doing some seed harvest from those plants. And you can see here in this picture, we got some lettuce plants in the background that this lady is doing some seed saving from. Now, biennials. Biennials are plants that need 2 years to complete their life cycle. So in the first year, they'll germinate, they'll get into their vegetative state, and then they'll go into a dormancy state at the end of the year. But then next year, they'll grow back and then go into their flowering and fruiting year. So for our seed saving purposes, that means that when we plant this plant, we should expect to get that seed harvest next year. Now, what's the biennials are the interesting crop where that we have to account for winter. And we also need to know that sometimes we do a spring planting of biennials, specifically with things like brassicas, your collards, your kales, your broccoli. And then we also do like a fall planting of that too, of the same crops. So in spring, I'm planting my collards, my kales, and then once those peter out after the summer, I got another round planted in the fall. And so when I'm deciding if I'm going to do some seed saving, which crop am I going to save seeds from? We should be saving seeds from those fall plantings because those ones are going to be a lot stronger and a lot more hardier and a lot more, better looking than the ones planted in the fall, or planted in the spring, just because those ones, they went through summer and now they got to, make it through the winter. And so they kind of lose their strength as they go on. And I just came back from my farm. My fall crop plants were planted in fall, spring crop plants planted in spring. And you would think that the spring crops would look a lot bigger and stronger than the ones planted earlier, or later in fall, but it's the opposite way. The ones that I planted in fall look a lot better than the ones that were planted back in the spring. And so when I'm making my selection based on how strong that plant is going to be, specifically for your biennials, you're going to be selecting from those ones that are planted later in the season. And also going into another thing with biennials, those carrots, those beets, these are all biennial crops. This means that they need to go through a dormancy period before they start to seed and flower to ensure that they make it through a winter, because plants can die out because they're hit by too much cold, too much, freezing winds and so on. There are things that we need to do to make sure that those crops are protected throughout the winter. And so one common practice with carrots and beets specifically, they get harvested out, the root, and including the root that supports the plant, along with the root ball and the top of the plant. Now that top of that plant can get cut off, not all the way, we're just taking off the top part of the leaves. And then that's stored inside of a kind of cool, dry place, which won't allow that plant to dry out. And
root cellar kind of thing.
Root cellar type. And so that pretty much stays inside of there all throughout winter. And then you come out and, plant that plant. It's also an opportunity, if you're doing any breeding selection, to say, okay, this one doesn't look that great, or this one looks really good. Plant those ones that look good and let those ones go to flower and seed. And then those would be the ones that you would be seed saving from. So it gets a little bit more in depth with the biennials, simply because you just have to account for that winter. And you can sometimes avoid, harvesting your plant and having to save it and such. You can, depending on how hardy that plant is, like for brassicas, for example, you could leave them covered with some type of cloth over the winter just to help them out to get through. and so on, just to guarantee that they make it through. So we'll talk more about the biannual life cycle, but that's kind of a quick overview for those ones. And I guess I'll also talk about perennials as well. Perennials, it might take them a year or two to get to their seeding state, but from that point, you can basically treat them like you're seed harvesting from a annual crop, where you can expect to get those seeds each year.
Can you give an
Right.
example of what would be a perennial crop that we would save from?
Yeah. So there aren't that too many of the perennial crops that we give out within the Garden Resource Program besides no, actually, not most of the flowers are annuals. So a native plant that we do some seed harvesting from are black-eyed Susans. So
Right.
typically now that first year we weren't able to do seed saving from that, but the plant made it through the winter because it's a perennial and it's very hardy to Michigan. But come next year we're able to do some seed saving from that after those plants have dried out after the summer. So it's
There's
it's
a
an
lot of
easier waiting game than biannuals.
right. So like a lot of the perennial flowers like purple
Mhm.
coneflower and I mean there's endless, there's so many of
Yeah,
them. Right. Okay.
there's a lot, but those are definitely simple after they get established.
Right.
Oh, great. Okay, so I think that basic information about the plant flowers. So the stomas, what receives the pollen, the anthers, what produces the pollen. So you can imagine the anther is the male part of the flower and the stoma, the female part. And then the ovaries are where those seeds are pollinated from. Just a good thing to note. There are different types of flowers, those that are self-pollinators and such. And this is a bean plant, bean flower. And this right here is a tomato plant, which are self-pollinators. And that's something that really helps, makes them easy to be seed saved from. And outcrossers, this is a picture of a okra flower, meaning that it is pollinated by bees. And so there's an option or a potential for cross-pollination to happen with those. This right here is a picture of squash plants, which relies on bees to pollinate from it. And so with these ones, it's very important that you plant your squash plants by the squash plants that you want that plant to pollinate with. Make sure that you're not having two different types of cucumbers or two different types of squash. And this right here, I believe, is a mustard green, which is in the brassica family. And so there's so many different crops that we love within the brassica family. And so if you have some wild mustard that is growing in the field, a bee might come and pollinate that and then come on your brassicas, which you waited the winter to go seed, and then that comes and pollinates it, and then that changes what that seed will look like if you germinate it. And so isolation. So in this picture here, you can see some tents and so on. These are probably different varieties that they don't want bees coming in and mixing, and also pollen to be blown in from other areas and such. It's also important to know the families and the genus names of the weed plants that are growing around in your area. A very common one that you should know is your Queen's Anne's lace, which is related to carrots and also in the umbel family. So a typical caution for doing seed saving with carrots is that you want to make sure that the Queen's Anne's lace that's growing within your area are not flowering at the same time that your carrots are flowering. And that's also an important thing to note too. We talk about isolation and so on, but plants have also evolved as well with isolation in mind. So your plants are not going to be flowering all at the same time. They understand as well that there's so many different pollinators out there that they might need. There's also competition and so on. And so, they've strategized as well to seed and flower and so on at a certain time so that those right circumstances could happen, as they need it. And so our job is really easy in that all we need to do is make sure that we put that plant in the right circumstances and in the right area so that it can succeed as far as our seed saving goals go for it. And so one way of doing isolation is to grow only one variety of a plant. So somebody mentioned that they did some seed saving of sunflowers. Don't know if their backyard or such looked like this, but you could definitely do a lot less than that to make sure that you get guaranteed open pollination with your sunflowers. But this is just another type of isolation that you can do for your plants. You definitely do a lot less. And then also distance in between those plants. So I can't quite make out what that plant is in the background, but this plant here, this grower understands that, okay, at this certain distance, these plants, they just have to be this far away from each other so that they don't cross-pollinate with each other. And I imagine that these plants are in either different varieties of each other or the same variety. And probably the most important thing to take into consideration with seed saving is that your plants are going to need extra time. So when we do provide our list of plants that we give out with the garden research program, we provide the seed period for you, and then also the harvest period and so on. But what that typically doesn't include is the time that we need for that plant to do seed saving, which can look a little bit different. So let's take, for example, crops that we know and love, our tomato plants. Sometimes we're getting that planted in May or June sometimes, depending on how our gardening goes. And then those crops are really going to start fruiting in late July and really come on in August and even go on till September. Now we could be harvesting from those crops, yes, but one thing that we also need to do with that crop is let it mature on the vine. And so if you harvest your plants too early, yes, that fruit crop, it might be red and so on, but that seed inside what you want for seed saving might not be fully developed yet. And so what we want to do is leave that crop or leave that fruit on the vine until it starts to, feel a little bit squishy or, look a little older or a little bit rougher. That's what we're looking for with seed saving. We want mature seeds from our fruiting crops. And for our flowering crops, which are like your lettuces here in the background, we want those, to fully grow out until their fruiting stem protrudes out of the middle of it. And this also happens with brassicas, your collards and kills as well. It's very similar to this picture here, where a stem will come out from the middle of it and then those will be where the flowers come from out of the middle.
Right. So I think the example of the tomato is probably just to like, tomatoes are, I mean, yes, you want them to be really ripe, but just to, I guess to like, that's probably one of the
Mhm.
easier ones to just, you know, it's like you harvest it when you're going to eat it, and that's pretty close to it being mature seed, right? Whereas
Mhm.
like whereas like cucumbers, we're harvesting those when we're to eat, when we're eating cucumbers, we're harvesting the immature fruit. And then if we really want to save seeds from that cucumber, we got to leave it on the vine until it gets big and bulbous and yellow, right?
Right. One thing I will add about that is that we're typically eating our crops, the foods that we eat when they're young. When they're older and more developed, they're hardier, they're not that tasty, because that the energy of that plant has really went into developing that seed of that plant. It's no longer focused on its leafy greens or its fruit. At the earlier stages, it's more focused on producing that seed. And so
Yeah.
for like the purposes of harvest, you know, we're telling you to, okay, you want to harvest your tomato at this stage, and you want to harvest your cucumbers when they're like, you know, 6 inches to, you know, almost a foot, depending on the type that it is. Same thing for your squash. We're shooting for, you know, younger stages of that plant. If the seed saving, specifically for fruiting crops, we're going to let that crop continue to mature, you know, past that stage where we'd ideally harvest that crop for eating,
Yes.
where we're saving it for a different purpose. And I also have some examples for us. We'll go off of the PowerPoint in a little bit, where we'll look at some of our seeds. But for your farm planting purposes, you know, when we're going out, you know, making decisions on, okay, we're going to plant our spring crops, you know, then, and then we're going to, you know, pull those out and then get our summer crops in, or, you know, get our fall crops in. With seed saving, we need to also take into account how much time, you know, this lettuce is going to need to get into its fruiting stage and flowering stage, excuse me, so that we can do some seed saving for it. So it will definitely look like a little bit more extended time for that crop. And a simple way to get around that farm planting is that, okay, you got your plants that, you know, you're going to eat, that you're going to grow, and that you're going to eat. But now we need to, you know, save maybe 20% or maybe 10% of that crop for those seeds that we're going to save from. And one great thing about seed saving is that plants in nature, they understand that, you know, not every seed will make it. You know, so many things happen within nature that they seed a lot. So like from one tomato plant, you could get almost 100 to 150 seeds. From a watermelon plant, you can get, you know, almost 200 seeds. From a pepper plant, you can get 550 to 500 seeds. From a lettuce plant, you can get thousands of seeds, and so on. You know, it also goes for your weed seeds too. You know, those seed quite a bit, but also our vegetable plants that we typically eat. And so you don't really need to have too many plants in order to, you know, seed save for your garden next year. So in your planning, all you really have to do is just leave over some so that they can, you know, finish seeding, and then in that spot right next to them, you can, you know, plant your next crop. and eventually turn those crops out.
Can we talk about that a little bit? So you were talking
Mhm,
about earlier about like bean plants, and you were suggesting doing like 20 plants. Why
mhm,
would you, but like if you're a home gardener, if you just had, like it was this time of year and you just had, like in my backyard, I have six, I don't know, 6 or 8 plants of beans, and they're mostly
yeah,
done, but there's still some beans on the vine that I've left, and they're maturing, and in theory I could save seed from them. So
yeah.
is that cool, or is there a reason that you would want to have more plants?
Mhm. So it all depends on the amount of seeds that you want.
Right.
So for our purposes, we are going to do a distribution for the people picking up CSA boxes. That's about 50 people. So we want to give them but a packet of seed that weighs about zero 0.7 ounces each. And so the calculations, that means that we're going to need quite a bit of seeds. And basically what I'm doing in my garden or in my farm, I'm just going to be leaving behind those bean plants. I'm not going to pull them out any earlier. So I'm just going to let them go until November until I need them. Now for the home garden scale, especially for those self-pollinating plants, you know, once they're, finished for the season, meaning that they're not fruiting anymore, meaning that those seeds are developing. What we're waiting on is just for those seeds to dry out. Same thing with those beans. For these beans in specific, that's going to happen in October, November. But for your other crops, it might happen in different types of the times of the year, depending on that crop. So once those seeds dry out, and we'll talk about when seeds are ready, but that's typically when they're dry. That means that we can harvest from them. So it really all depends on how many seed you need. So like from that bean plant, depending on when keto you stopped harvesting from, those bean plants, they might have a considerable amount of beans just on one plant. And you mentioned that you only planted 6. You can get 6 beans from, one pod easily. And so if you imagine you got, let's say maybe 20 pods from a bean planting that you just let go, after September, you've got your seed saving done for beans, for a while. Now you might want to take into consideration, maybe you want to eat some of those beans over the winter. So you might want to do some different type of seed saving or over winter eating. But, you know, that's one thing to take into consideration with seed saving, especially which would be your scale. How much seeds do you need? How much space is that going to take?
Right.
And
And
what's the purpose of that?
one other thing that comes to mind that I've heard people talk about with seed saving is just to like, particularly as you get better at it, and the beginning is just like, just get good at the seed saving part. But as you get
Mm-hmm.
better at it, and you have success, to be like looking at the quality of the plant itself. Like in theory, always if you grow a certain number of plants, if you go 20 plants or more, then you can look at each individual plant, and like one plant, there's always going to be a couple runts that are kind of small, or they just turn out to be
Mm-hmm.
like kind of duds out the gate, and they are really runty or whatever. And then there's other ones that like are really prolific, and maybe that's, so if you're focusing on, selecting over time the ones that are always trying to get the ones that are the best looking, most prolific. Like for instance, when we're saving seed for garlic for the GRP, we're always, the seed that we plant out for GRP is always our best, our A stock, right?
Mm-hmm. For garlic, yes.
Right.
Right. So garlic is, same principles and so on, but it's a little different with its seed saving, where it's asexually reproduced, meaning that we take a cutting or the clove from it, and it's basically the same plant that we're
Right.
remultiplying. The difference is the soil and the environment that it's grown in, and so that's where we get those variances.
Right.
Can we take some time to do some questions in the chat?
Yeah. Right. Yes. Okay. So we got, I think we more or less address this, but I'll just read it out anyways. How many seeds
Mhm.
should we aim to save for one pack? I.e., save 3 times the number you want to plant?
Mm,
It's,
so from a pack, I would be assuming that you're talking about a seed packet. Would that be a safe assumption, Keto?
yeah.
But so from those seeds, what we want you to do is to, plant all those seeds that you get from the seed packet that you get from us. Now, and then you grow out those seeds and then you do seed saving from that. That's what we're that's what we're recommending that people do with the seeds that they receive from us, the ones that can be open pollinated from us. Now you can do, if you don't need all those seeds that we give, you can definitely save some of those seeds and do those practices of putting them in a cool, dark place that you can save. But
this makes me think about germination rate.
Germination rate.
Right. So, I mean, I guess, so maybe we should just kind of maybe keep it going here. I think that it's kind of a personal choice, I would say, but this does make me think about germination rate, which is basically that, if you grow 100 seeds, you're not guaranteed that 100 of them will germinate. And what oftentimes people will do is do a germination test. They have a sense of the quality of their seeds. So really you can save as many seeds or as many or as little seeds as you want, but if you want to make sure that you have enough for what you want to accomplish, like say you're going to give them away as gifts during the holiday season or for friends, just in the springtime, but so you would want to make sure that those, you did a little germ test to make sure that what you did, and that's basically soaking the seeds and putting them in a paper towel and that whole process. Okay, moving on.
And I'll just add to that one other thing. You can also do some selections just from the size of the seeds. So every single seed looks a little bit different. You want to look for the ones that look the healthiest to you. So the bigger ones, you want to shoot to save first. But yes, moving on, Keto.
Okay, so I tried to save hibiscus seeds, but some of them had tiny black bugs inside. Do we need to fumigate the seeds first?
No, you do not need to do that. I'd recommend when you are doing your seed savings to make sure that those seeds are bug free before you harvest them out. And if those were the only seeds that you've had, depending on if the insects ate those or not, those might be not savable.
Right.
One thing that you could still do is, still put them in storage, of course, get the tiny bugs out the way. Store them properly, cool, dark place, and then, plant them next year. Or you could even take some of those seeds and, do a germ test on them to see if they're viable.
Yes. Yep.
Do not recommend fungigating the seeds, though that might damage the seed.
Yes. Yep. Okay, next question. I've had some tomatoes that have seeds inside sprouting when they're harvested. I first thought they were little worms, but our close examining found they were seeds. What caused that to happen?
Yeah. So for tomatoes and cucumbers, so that's what we would call a wet seed. Now, this is a dormancy inhibitor that these fruits have because it's just so wet that the plant doesn't want those things to germinate too early. And so what you experienced was that the that wet coat around that seed, it either did it develop fully, or either that degraded while it was still inside the tomato, and then causing that seed to germinate. And we'll kind of go into this a little bit now. That's what we want to happen with our our tomato seeds after we harvested fully right from that plant. We have to get off that wet seed coat, which is preventing that plant from germinating. Now that naturally happens just through the seed decaying or so on off the vine or on the vine. But ways that we can, make that happen in a system, we'll do a fermentation process where that involves, taking that tomato plant into a cup, adding some water, and basically sitting and waiting for those seeds to, degrade and I just said the word, I'm losing the word to.
Right, so squeezing out the juices and the seeds into a cup and letting it decompose, letting it ferment.
Basically letting it ferment. That's the word I just lost. Yes. So basically, it's a process that will naturally happen if that tomato falls from either its growing place. I already see it happening inside of my greenhouse where we have tomatoes planted, still pretty warm in there. And I can see little baby tomato plants growing from past tomatoes. So it's a natural fermentating process that happens and that we can encourage to happen.
Okay, last.
Go
ahead.
And I was just gonna say the last question, a good rule of thumb for seed saving, for how long we can save seeds, it's about 3 years. It's shorter for some seeds, but generally 3 years is what we recommend for most crops. And if you have that graphic of these seed savings, but for crops like alliums, it's going to be 1 year, which are onions and leeks and so on. But 3 years is a general good term.
Right. And I actually have a more specific reference chart, which I will share out with everybody after the class. I'll share out the slides from today. And if we end up discussing any other references, I'll make sure and put it in the follow-up email.
Thanks, Keto. Now, we talked about putting up some isolation, some barriers. And this right here, I believe we have some collar plants in the background. Again, those are biennials, meaning that these plants went through a winter and now they're, growing again. Now they're flowering and so on. And so bees are coming to pollinate to them and all of this. And so, this person doesn't want those to get cross-pollinated with something else. They just want them to pollinate amongst themselves. This person put a barrier cloth around them, to prevent that. And here, look, we can even see in our plantings that, it's okay for tomato plants to be right next to our seed-saving collards, because those plants aren't going to cross with each other. And you can even take this on another scale if you want to make sure that your tomato plant isn't crossing with something else, doing smaller individual barriers around that fruit. And how many plants to grow? So we talked about this briefly. So it's really going to be dependent on how many seeds you want to save, and then also the genetic strength that you want that seed to have. So this right here is a graph that really shows how many plants you need to have to really increase that genetic strength. So like for tomatoes, for example, you don't really need that many crops for those plants for that seed saving to go well. And here's kind of like a inbreeding, meaning that they will be breeding with each other. And same thing for peppers, which are very much in the same family. So a characteristics of them. So with tomatoes and so on, you can probably get away with having 10 tomatoes, peppers, maybe about 10 to 15 of those around each other. For squash, you might need to grow out some more because those are open pollinated, meaning that they need bees to take that pollen from one to the next. You need quite a bit of squash to attract those bees. Same with brassicas. You will need quite a bit more brassicas to successfully do seed saving from those. And knowing your environment, this kind of gets into the argument of genetics versus environment. Well, it is both. It is both that we all need to take into account for, and can't really have the genetics without the environment. So making sure that your soils are nice and healthy, that they're disease free as much as they can be, and that you're consistently watering that plant when it needs water, so that all that plant really has to worry about is producing the best crop or producing that best seed. So doing your basic things of soil management will also help you do your basic things of seed saving. So it's kind of a important well, it is a important prerequisite to seed saving, making sure that you're doing your good seed saving or good soil management practices. And let's see, there's not too many slides after this, but this is more examples of some lettuce plants being isolated from each other. But knowing when to harvest, so understanding what's that life cycle of that plant is going to tell us when to harvest that plant. So if it's an annual, that means that it's going to be growing within that year. Biennial, meaning that it's going to grow next year. If it's perennial, that means that you might not harvest the flower from there that first year, but the second year and years after, you will be able to harvest that plant. And getting down into specifics, we got our vegetative crops, which a lot of them are biennials and some of them are annuals. And then you got your fruiting crops. For our fruiting crops in particular, we need to make sure that those ripen while they're on the vine. That is the most important thing to note about, when to harvest, especially for your fruiting crops. And I'll also add that as we're harvesting from crops like your collards, your kales, and so on, you know that we take the leaves and those are the things that we eat from those crops. At a certain point in that plant's life cycle, especially if you decide that you're going to do seed saving from that, you'll, if you don't have enough plants that you can have, your plants that you harvest from and your plants that you seed save from, if that's going to be one plant, that is what it is. But ideally, you stop harvesting from that plant so that you can let that plant just focus on growing. So it's okay to do that in, maybe it's early maturity stages, but for that plant to really put its energy and have all of its tools to do that seed production, you will want to, ease up on the harvesting on that plant so that it can focus on growing seeds. Not really a huge concern for those fruiting crops like tomatoes and your squash and so on, because they're already at their fruiting stage and you're not harvesting the leaves from them. But a concern for those things like lettuces, broccoli, well, if you take your broccoli head off, that's the flowering part, but your collards and your kales and so on. And here's another visual of a bean plant in its different stages. So as you're going out to harvest your beans, if you got any beans right now, you can see that there are ribby right now. That's just the beginning stages of that seed production. So it needs to still dry out some more to fully ripen out before we get it to harvest. And if you do go out there and take a look at that bean seed, and just test it. Now, let's say you might not know when that seed is going to be ready. If you do have enough examples or enough specimens for experiment, you can, take that bean seed and, take it out. What we're shooting for is a completely dry seed. And so if you take one of the seed pods from there and break it up and cut open a bean seed, and if it's still wet, that definitely means that that beet or that bean is not ready for harvest.
Not ready for
But
saving.
if it's nice and dry or ripe for saving, thank you, might be still good for eating, a little crunchy. But if you take that out when it's at a drier stage where it's no longer green and so on, and that seed is completely hard and dry when you cut one open, that means that it's ready for seed storage. All right, different pictures of different types of crops. So here's a picture Keto mentioned about the cucumbers, how we need to wait for it until it turns a different color on the vine. So this is a picture of a older cucumber that's almost ready for some seed saving. All right, so preparing your seeds, particularly for dry seeds, like this is some, that looks like edamame right there. Ooh, edamame is a very fun plant to do some threshing from. They have to go through a dehusking process where you break that seed pod to free that seed from it. And so that involves, getting pretty physical with your plants, from breaking it up to using different things, to using your hands, to using things like a windrow system when you're allowing wind to catch the broken up parts of that seed pod so that all that's left that doesn't blow away is that seed. And so there's an actually a very fun part in the seed saving experience. And that leftover seed pod can be reused in your compost system and so on. And here's a physical picture of how to handle wet seeds. So this process will naturally happen if you just let a tomato, sit inside or sit in your soil or, sit on top of the soil. It will naturally decay within itself, and then those seeds will be ready for harvest. I have a physical example for us to check out. But in this one, we're just emptying out those seeds, just the seeds. The flesh of that tomato you can still cook with, but those seeds are going to be left behind in a cup to ferment within itself. And all we have to do is just add a little bit of water and stir it every now and then. And then those seeds that land on the bottom of that are going to be the ones, they're going to be free of their watery coat and ready for seed saving. And that process usually takes about a week or so to do, depending on how warm the area is that it's done at. And we only have to do this for cucumbers and tomatoes for this process if you want to speed it up for our own purposes. And here's just another picture of the fermenting. It does stink, so outside is best, or a well ventilated area,
Or put a lid on it.
or put a lid on it. And then afterward, all you have to do is wash and prepare the seeds, shifting out and picking out any of the leftover plant or fruit material. And then all you have to do is dry it afterwards. You don't want to let that seed stay too wet, otherwise it will start to germinate. So you have to do this process fairly quickly. So you do have to check your plants because once that seed coat is gone, it's ready for growing time. So this really all has to be done, as quickly as possible. And so we were talking about those beans earlier. But for those beans to be ready for harvest, they have to be, when they crack open, they can't be, mushy or so on. They just have to be completely dry. Now, if your seed is, totally dry or completely dry, that's, doesn't mean that your seed won't germinate. The embryo inside will help that seed preserve and make it so that it's ready for you once you get that seed coat wet. But if this part right here is, if it's too mushy, that seed is not ready yet for seed saving. And storage. So this is just a picture of a seed company with tons of seeds. And with seed saving, notations and records are very important. So simple things like putting the names on top of the variety. For seed company purposes, they might have things like their lot number, which is a system or a something that they have to abide by. But for our purposes, what you need can also just be the type of plant it is, its variety, when you harvested it. And you can also write down here some of the characteristics of that plant if you'd like, just for note keeping purposes. And then how to share. Well, I believe it's been a while since we've done any seed swap events, but we'll hopefully try to have some of those.
I saw there's a few events coming up. One I saw, let me see if I can find it. There's a little seed swap happening at Griffin Gardens, I think.
Fun.
I'll drop it in the chat.
I'd definitely like to go to there, but we got some time left over, so I'm gonna go exit off of here. And if you all have any questions, you can open up the chat. This is the end of the PowerPoint, but not the end of the lesson. So how do I do screen share for me? Can you make it so that my video screen for my face is on the main picture? Cool. I will unmute myself later. All right, so welcome to the physical demonstration for us. So, all right, so here I got some old tomato plant that was, dried up pretty much on the vine. So I mentioned that, there's
the fruit, right? Oh, it's a dried up fruit.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is the dried up fruit of a black cherry tomato off of the vine here. And so we'll have to see if this has finished fermenting or finished its thing, if the seeds are free. One thing that you do have to know about this is that it can sometimes have some molding that might be happening inside the seed. And also some other critters that are in here that I see, but lots of things. Beautiful. But another simple method is just taking that tomato, putting it inside a cup here. I mean, you can squeeze out this tomato. I'm still gonna eat this tomato, so I'm just gonna put that in here. Add some water to that and pretty much just let that tomato sit. You can even, squish it and such just to help speed up that process. Seal it. That will also help quicken that fermenting process, but I do recommend that you don't seal it completely because it is fermenting and there will be a buildup of gases within there. So leave it a little half open just so that some air can escape.
Wait,
And that's
question, Kello. You said how I'm unclear. How are you still gonna eat it if you put the whole thing in the jar?
I'm saying I'm gonna eat this tomato. This is a
Oh, so
demonstration.
you're not gonna, okay. Well, you show us how you squeeze the seeds out. Come on.
Fine, there are more tomatoes on the farm.
There are many, many tomatoes on the farm. This is a class. Thank you.
So,
Okay.
very simple. And you can also cut this to get the, directly to the seeds.
Right. So it's just the juice, it's just the seeds, and so, but you can still eat the rest of that, right?
I will still eat the rest of this.
All right. Let's see.
I will. How are we gonna? Well,
I'm just
gotta get the people out. But so that's a quick example of also the tomatoes, of one that's dried out on the vine, and also one that we will do some fermenting with.
Right. But
No.
can we just talk about that for a second though before we move on?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the fermenting on the vine one. That seems
well, with everything, we're mimicking nature, right? So this process naturally happens where, we might not necessarily encourage it with this, where it happens on our timeline, but if we just leave a tomato, if it leaves it in the field or if it's dropped in like where it was growing, you might see, there's some tomatoes that are sprouting where my tomato plant was, right?
We get volunteers in our gardens all the time, right?
That's where we get those volunteers that's happening. That means that, that plant, it fermented right there. The seed or the wet coat that was around it, degraded right there. And so those seeds were able to germinate. So, this process, it's naturally happening. For our purposes here, we're helping speed that process along and also helping making sure that, some of these seeds in here, they had some maggots and so on. And so, that's one risk of just, letting those seeds be outside. In this process, we're able to control for a lot more.
Right. Okay.
Seeing some maggots right now. But that's just a example of us mimicking nature and trying to get some things in motion. Now here I got a tomato plant a cucumber, which also needs to go through a fermenting process. This one has been off of the vine for a while, so we'll see what's the stage at with this one. So although it's still a little spongy, let's see what the light is like. The seeds are still pretty wet, so that one also still needs to go through a fermenting process. And this one has been off the vine for almost a month now. So that us doing this fermenting process really helps speed it along so that we can, do that seed saving, on our timeline. Tomatoes are pretty quick actually to, get to this point. But for, cucumbers, I definitely don't recommend, you can do, random seed saving from plants that have just dropped, but for fermenting, I definitely highly recommend, even for the tomatoes and peppers, that you do this. And this is the only crop that we have to do this for, or that it's recommended to do. For this one, we're just going to go in and we're not going to eat this one keto. So we can.
Well, because it's overripe and we probably don't want to eat it anyway, right?
Yeah. I believe it's pretty sour at this stage.
Yeah.
But it's overripe, but it's perfect for seed saving. Perfect.
It's yeah, exactly. Right.
So that one looks like just going in there directly to that seed, getting it onto this cup. Now, for the class purposes, these are mixed together, but in your own seed saving and fermenting, you'd want to do these separately just to keep the seeds separate, because those will be a hassle separating once they're dry.
Right.
Now, a crop, this is a summer squash that we just pulled off the farm. We want to harvest these when they've completely dried out on the stem. So when this part is dry, and then we want to go in and we can even see that some of this is starting to get a lot older. And with this one, just getting in there to that center part. And sorry about some of that quality on the camera, but the seeds are already dry and pretty much ready to go. So what we're shooting for with this is that we want the seed head of this to be completely dry, and for these these seedlings to be dry too. Now, if I breaking this open,
this, the seed head,
this the knob, excuse me, the knob on the fruit.
okay,
We want that to be dry
on the
and
vine.
for that to on the vine, and that to naturally dry out all by itself. We don't want to harvest this or separate this from the plant.
Okay.
That can all happen by itself with the squash plant. That also goes for winter squash and summer squash and zucchinis. Now, at this stage, the seed isn't quite ready yet because it's still pretty wet, even on the inside. So this has to go through a drying period as well. And you can almost call that even a curing stage. So I'd say leaving it in a cool, dark, dry place just to let it dry out all by itself. And then that seed would be ready for some seed storage. If we were to try to use it right now, it wouldn't be quite ready. It's even a little bit flexible right now. So it's still pretty milky, not quite ready yet, but still needs a extra step. And this one, I just put this out the vine. Actually, naturally came off the vine a while ago. What I probably do is still let this dry out a little bit more before I came in here and harvested those seeds from it. Well, now we got some eggplant, which is interestingly dried out. It's almost kind of rubbery in a way, but we'll see what this one looks like on the inside and see what those seeds are. So I'm just going to cut this one open, and we're going to see what those seeds are doing. So the eggplant, depending on the type of color of that eggplant, so like this black eggplant, when it's pretty much finished, it will turn brown. Other eggplants, they might turn white or so on. So it really depends on that color for that indication of when it's going to be, becoming more mature and ripening. But you can always look for brown marks that appear on your eggplant. And there's really small, tiny seeds inside of here. Lots of seeds. So I'd say maybe even about 100 seeds that are growing right inside of this eggplant.
Are they mature?
No, they're not mature yet. I think that this one just didn't really actually have that opportunity to ripen fully on the vine. So this was just a specimen that I picked up that I saw on the ground. But to really decide and figure out those seeds are ready, especially for those ones that are seeds that should be dry within that plant, you want to just take a couple seeds, break them open, see if that seed embryo is, or see if that seed is dry. See if you mash it down, if it, mushes or if it cracks. Now, if it cracks, that means that seed is ready. If it mushes, that means that that seed is not ready. And these seeds are not ready on this eggplant. But also probably why I might be seeing that is that this is a hybrid variety of the eggplant. So just for our examples, sake of examples, just looking at it and seeing how those seeds look inside of here. What?
And I just want to make a comment that, we're talking about some different examples here. And there's a lot of different kind of rules and regulations, so to speak, for the different types of vegetables. And you don't, you'll learn them over time, but you can also, the reference books, there's some really great reference books. So like we're giving you, I think a lot of what we're intending to give you today is kind of the foundation information for what you need to know in steps of the process. But if you want to get down to the specific information about, is it self-pollinating? Is it biennial? All that, plus, any kind of seclusion you might need to do and that kind of thing. I'm going to put at least one book in the chat that's a really great reference for that, called Seed to Seed by Suzanne Ashworth.
Thank you. And here we have our biennial crops. So our carrots and beets. Now these are a little bit smaller, but the principles are still the same. So with seed saving for these, you pull out the entire crop. Now these ones, you want to make sure that they survive throughout the winter. In some cases, if your winter isn't super harsh, you can get away with either, just leaving those plants. But if you understand, or if you understand your winter and know that it's not going to be that suitable for even biennial crops to make it through consistently, you want to harvest a couple of these and put them inside of your root cellar. Now, to get them ready for saving, you're gonna top just that top part of them, and this is what we're gonna be saving of that plant. These will definitely rot over the winter, but all we need here is just for that root system to stay intact and those leaves or the smaller part to stay here. And this is what you're gonna be saving over the winter and then replanting in the next spring. Same thing goes for the carrot, topping it. You do want to leave a little bit part of it. You don't want to cut it here where it won't be growing back. And we want to make sure that that root system stays intact when we plant it. So this is how we want to save our biennial crops. Now you can also do this with your brassicas, like your cabbage, whereas if you're gonna save your cabbage plant, that means that you're going to be, now I don't have a big cabbage plant here, but let's imagine here that this is our cabbage plant and it's very leaves all around it. You want to clear those leaves around, leave that root system intact, clear out those extra leaves. And that's gonna be what we save over the winter. And when we replant it, yes, we have that root system still intact and we plant that in the ground. But what we want to do is cut open the middle of that cabbage so that we can have that center stem protrude out of that center cabbage a lot more easily. And that's the process with cabbage. And those are the fun fruits and vegetables that I have.
So for the cabbage specifically, or other brassicas like collards or kale, we'll put those like in some sand in the basement or something.
Sand in the basement. Now collards and kale, those ones are going to be a lot easier to make it through the winter. So with those ones, I recommend just using something like a piece of remake cloth or some type of
row cover protection,
winter protection cloth to go around those plants, and those plants will do fine. In my experience of just leaving crops over the winter at the farm, collards, kale, cabbage, or excuse me, collards, kale, and dino kale, those ones have an easy time or easier time making it through the winter. But with some cloth, their success rate will definitely be improved a lot more. So you don't have to go through the trouble of completely uprooting those plants. You can let them stay right inside the soil. Let's see. We are almost close to the end. Any other questions or things you think we should reiterate, Keto?
I think we're doing pretty good. We've been addressing a lot of the questions. I'm gonna take you off the
Mhm.
spotlight. So yeah, at this point, we would open it up for if there's anything on your mind, if we didn't answer any questions that you had specifically. I do want to just say one more time that to try things out, like a lot of these things, and don't be intimidated by the idea of like isolation. There's a lot of times if you're just kind of paying attention to how things like lettuce, for instance, in your garden is probably going to bolt. If like, say you just wanted to, you had 3 varieties of lettuce and you just wanted to save one of them, just don't let the other 2 bolt. Like just take out the other plants and then you could save from one of them at least. Or like, and there's, there's a lot of, we didn't kind of go into the grand list of all the things that that we even distribute through the GRP that are, or the relatively ease or hardness of any of them, but like coriander or cilantro is super easy to save seed from. Let's see, I think maybe let's just tick off the list of the things that are super easy to save seed from. A lot of any of the perennial flowers, once they've established themselves. Let's see, spinach is another one that you just got to let it, and spinach doesn't have a cross, that a regular crosser.
I'd also add in nasturtiums. I was going
Nasturtiums
to bring some nasturtium seeds.
super
Those look
easy.
actually
Yep.
very beautiful
Right.
seed save from.
Okay, so Tish is asking, I like the flavor of burgundy carrots or the rainbow carrots. If I save the seeds of the burgundy carrots, will I get random colors or burgundy?
Yeah. So
So,
Tris,
but let's ask
yeah,
her that. What's the question? The first question is,
yeah. Will I get random seeds if I seed save from that? Right. So,
or is it like, do you know what are they a hybrid or are they a
right. So there are first things that you do have to take into consideration. So, what type of seed is it? Is it a open pollen seed? And also with like rainbow carrots, does that mean that it's a mixture of different types of carrots? That's also just a question I had. Or is that just one type of carrot? Now, once you know, and let's assume that this is an open pollinated seed, next we're going to have to take into consideration the environment. Do you have a lot of Queen's Anne's lace in that area or other plants in the umbel family that are growing around it? So things like your I believe that carrots will be or Queen's Anne's lace will be the closest thing. So
right.
if you do have Queen's Anne's lace growing around your neighborhood and your in your garden, that will be something that you'll have to account for if you're going to do some seed saving. So when you're doing your seed saving, or you have a bunch of your carrots, and let's say you took them through your winter process of saving them, and they came back and bloomed, while those carrots are blooming, in May and during the spring, you want to make sure in your area or in your neighborhood, or within what's in your garden, especially, that there isn't any Queen's Anne's lace growing around. This is just a specific concern with carrots, since that is a very popular wheat seed that grows around the city. And so with your carrots, I would recommend that you put around a remake cloth or some type of breathable fabric around your carrots while those are flowering. You don't have to worry about doing that when it's just in its vegetative state. because there's no need for it. But when those carrots start to flower, make sure that you have your barrier or your cloth around that carrot so that you can ensure that you don't get random colors and that your carrots stay true to type. And, although we might not have that isolation and where we can do, give our plants multiple feeds or multiple distances, we can still do isolation in different methods where we, plant a lot of the same crop, where we isolate using barriers and so on. And so we might not have the distance, but we do have the technology and the planting plan to get around that. There was a question about how would you grow garlic from seeds in the shoot? So if you were going to grow some garlic from seeds, that would mean that instead of harvesting that very delicious, what is that called? Very delicious garlic scape, we will let that grow completely and let those seeds, completely mature on that vine. Now, what you'd find, and I would compare this to like an apple tree, whereas apples, that seed that you grow from that apple tree will not look like that apple tree again. And it's going to be the same thing with that garlic, whereas it will still be a garlic plant, but you will probably not get that garlic that you know and love. And so that's why we graft apples and also do asexual reproduction with garlic. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't grow that seed out from that garlic plant. You could definitely do that and see what happens with that, but definitely have the right expectations with seed saving for garlic.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions? What's on your mind? Are there any varieties that we did not talk about that you were looking for some info on?
Let's see. Other questions?
Okay. All right. Well, I think we covered a lot of information tonight.
Yeah.
I will be sharing the slides. I will be sharing the slides that we talked about this evening, as well as a few other resources, including the resources for books. We really hope that you walk away from this class feeling confident in being able to start seeds. Don't get overwhelmed by the lingo. You can save seeds from anything. You guys can do this. It's not hard.
And I like to add, even looking at it, I guess quickly, looking at what's in your garden right now. So if you have some tomatoes, some peppers, and first we have to understand if these are open pollinated or not. Like they're still seeds that we can do seed saving from, right now. Even your winter dino kale and your winter curly kale, you can look at those as perspectives to do some seed saving from next season if you leave those in the garden. So, we talk about the seed saving process and so on, but we already did the hard part, growing the plant out. Now it's time for us to reap the rewards, not only from the harvest, but also give those plants some time to produce those seeds. So, just think about it as we already did, so much of the growing process. Now it's just time to save those seeds. Yeah, that's one important connection to make.
Right on. Well, thanks, Akello, and thanks everybody for coming out. And I guess at this point, last question. If you save perennial seeds, do they need to be through a frozen state in order to grow out?
Yeah, talking about a dormancy process. So specifically for those native plants. So understanding if those plants are, native and have to go and, develop in a place that experiences winter. But so that what you mentioned there, going through a cool state, that is basically what's called a stratification process, where you basically mimic winter, where you take that seed and let's imagine I got just a cup of water here, or excuse me, I got my seeds, and just imagine that this cup is empty. I got my seeds in here. I'm going to mix in a little bit of sand. I'm going to pour in a little bit of water. Not too much water that the plant gets too soaked out and it starts to mold, but just a little bit so that it stays moist. And we're going to put that seed in that glass or that plastic, however your container is, inside of the cooler, and make sure that it's sealed a little bit. We still want some air to escape and some air to circulate through. And then we're just going to put that in there for either 30 days or 60 days, depending on that seed crop. You can look up that information to see if it's needed. And basically, you're just going to be checking on that seed daily to make sure it doesn't get too dry or is too wet. And then once it's gone through that 30 days or 60 days, you'll take it out and plant it. But you don't need to do that part of the cooling process until you're ready to plant it. So it can still stay in storage like all your other seeds. But before you go out and plant it in spring, just make sure it goes through that process of cold stratification if it needs to. And we talk about this in our native plant class, I believe. So that's a video to check out as well.
Right on.
But yeah, great question. Great question.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay. Good night, everybody. We'll be putting this video up on our YouTube channel. So you'll have it for future reference. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you all.
Good luck, Claudia.
Good night and thank you.
Good night, everybody. Good night, Nicole. Good night, everybody. Good night, good night, good night.
Good night.